넌 나를 바라보며 웃고 있어.
Thank you for joining the NCTM conference, Flipping Out Achievement for ELLs and Students with Special Needs. This is Eric again. On this short video, we're going to talk about the history of the flipped classroom. We're going to define it a little bit and talk about its increasing popularity over time. The history of the flipped classroom can be traced back to 3 professors at Miami University in Ohio, and they published an article in the Journal of Economic Education, which was called Inverting the Classroom, a Gateway to Creating an Inclusive Learning Environment. In this article, they began by talking about the often mismatch between students' learning styles and professors' teaching styles. They pointed out that often students do not choose professors based on their teaching style, and they might get into a situation where the teaching style and the learning style are mismatched. So they suggested the idea of an inverted classroom, and here's how they defined it. They said inverting the classroom means that the events that have traditionally taken place inside the classroom now take place outside the classroom and vice versa. Many of the ideas that we now connect with the flipped classroom were mentioned in this article, such as having the students prepare for class ahead of time and using in-class time to do more exciting enrichment type activities. However, the idea did not really catch on at that time. In 2000, the internet had not been developed to what it is today. YouTube had not been developed, and in general, the infrastructure for this outside of classroom learning and videos and material was not at a place where it could support the expansion of the inverted classroom. Let's fast forward 7 years and go to Woodland Park, Colorado. Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams were 2 chemistry teachers, and being a rural school, they had lots of students that were often missing because of long bus trips to and from activities, and they were spending a lot of their teaching time reteaching the students who had missed the class, and they realized the students who had missed the class could not go on to the next subject until they took their time to reteach them. So they found a program that allowed them to record the PowerPoints and speech and upload it online. This was a very successful technique for them, and it soon spread to nearby districts in Colorado and very quickly spread all over the United States. They said it transformed their teaching practice. They could spend much more time with the students, one-on-one tutoring, giving them the individual attention they needed, and the students outside of class were doing the preparation for class. It's interesting to take a look at how fast this has expanded in popularity. I got into the University of Connecticut library database search, and I put in a simple search. I used the search terms flipped classroom, flipped learning, flipped class, and flipped instruction. And I was looking to see how many articles were written on the topic since Bergman and Sams had developed the idea. As you can see, between 2007 and 2010, the academic research was not there. From 2010, in education, lots of research began. You can see the very quick increase from 2011 up until the current day. I think it's also interesting to see how the sciences, medicine, engineering, and business have followed along with this. There were lots of articles in medicine, engineering, and business that were talking about using the flipped model classroom in colleges. Even if we look at high school as a preparation for college, I think it's very important that we teach our students how to deal with the flipped classroom. I put the same search term into Google Trends just to see how the web search is matched, and it's very similar. About mid-2011 is when the flipped classroom search increased. One of the interesting points on Google is these dips in the search. These are always related to December and July. So it seems that teachers are least likely to research classroom strategies in December and July of each year. This is probably the time where we're taking our vacation seriously and not thinking too much about what's happening inside the classroom. So we've looked at the history and the popularity, but what is the flipped classroom? There's a little bit of debate whether or not flipped classroom and flipped learning are the same thing. I know in our household, my wife and I had a very heated discussion over which term should be used and what is the philosophical background behind it. Flipped classroom seems to be more of a method, while flipped learning seems to elevate the idea to a theory. One of the main organizations behind the flipped classroom is the Flipped Learning Network. They make a distinction between the flipped classroom and the flipped learning. The flipped classroom can be anything where you have the students prepare outside of class, but flipped learning really is a different philosophical approach to teaching. Here's what they say. They say flipped learning is a pedagogical approach in which direct instruction moves from group learning space to the individual learning space, and the resulting group space is transformed into a dynamic, interactive learning environment where the educator guides the students as they apply concepts and engage creatively in the subject matter. This is kind of moving the teacher from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. You can find more information at flippedlearning.org definition, and just flippedlearning.org is a great website if you're interested in flipped learning. The Flipped Learning Network has also created 4 pillars, and they've made FLIP into an acronym. So the first one is a flexible environment. By flexible environment, they seem to mean that both the physical environment in the room is often changed to accommodate flipped learning, but also there's flexibility in the timelines when things are due and the methods that you use to assess your students. The next one is learning culture. In my opinion, this is really the key of flipped learning. This moves the teacher from being the main source of information and makes class time into a constructivist time where students are creating information for themselves and the teacher is helping students deepen their understanding of the content. In our modern culture where there's so many sources of information, it's not reasonable that we are the only sources for the students' information. We need to just teach our students to learn for themselves and to be really responsible in where and how they get the information. The next I is for intentional content. Just because we're being flexible with the deadlines and the assessment methods does not mean that we can be lax and they can learn whatever they want or that we can let the standards down. The students still need to grasp the concepts and to be fluent with their techniques and processes. In addition, the teacher is always looking for which content should be taught explicitly and which content should be discovered by the students on their own. The next P is for professional education. This is the idea that a teacher in a flipped classroom may need to be more on top of their game than even a regular classroom teacher. The teacher is always observing the students, giving feedback, looking for ways to develop their understanding better, taking feedback from peers, collaborating with their peers, making new progress, making new programs, developing new content. The teacher is constantly looking to be the best educator, to be their best selves. In 2014, Chin, Wang, Kinshuk, and Chen wrote a paper that was somewhat critical of the Flipped Learning Network's 4 pillars, not because they were negative in any way against the 4 themselves, but they felt that they didn't go far enough. So they suggested that instead of the flip, they would talk about the flipped and added 3 more categories. The first one was P for progressive activities. This is looking at the idea that even though the content is flipped from at home to in class, and the in-class time is used for more intentional content, most teachers are still used to the lecture style of teaching. And so this is the idea that teachers should use the in-class time for more progressive activities, more constructivist activities, and more meaningful ways to help the students learn. The next E is for engaging experiences. The idea for adding this one is that the 4 pillars do not directly discuss the student learning experience, and that the experience of the students is very important, that the teacher should focus on creating engaging and effective experiences in the classroom. The final D is for diversified platforms. And the idea behind this is that when teachers are choosing methods to give the content to the students, that it needs to be via some platform that can be accessed easily at home, at school, on the go, so students always have access to the material whenever and wherever they are. I hope this section was useful for you. We'll see you in a few minutes when we talk about how the flipped classroom can be specifically useful for students with special needs and English language learners.